In January 1978, a blizzard shut down the entire eastern United States in ways most of us had never experienced and have never seen again. That particular week started like any other winter week. The radio said snow was coming. People nodded and went about their day. But by the time we woke on Wednesday morning, January 25th, we understood that something genuinely dangerous had arrived. The snow didn't fall. It arrived sideways. It didn't stop. It buried entire neighborhoods under 3, 4, sometimes 6 feet of snow in a matter of hours. I remember standing at the kitchen window that morning, coffee in hand, and honestly not being able to see across the street. The neighbor's house, the one just 50 feet away, had simply vanished behind the white. My husband had already left for work the night before, thinking he'd be back by midnight. He wasn't. By 8 o'clock, schools called. Then factories. Then the state police announced that no one should drive. Not shouldn't. Should not. The highways looked like something from another planet. Cars abandoned where they'd stopped, some with drivers still inside them, running the heat and waiting for help that moved incredibly slowly. The National Guard came out with trucks. People were stranded everywhere. What strikes me now, looking back, is how fast ordinary life simply stopped. Not gradually, stopped. The mailman didn't come for 3 days. The grocery stores, the ones that were open, had customers who came in boots that tracked wet snow across every inch of floor. Coffee cost about 40 cents. A loaf of bread was under $1. But honestly, many shelves were picked clean anyway. People had the same instinct. Get home, stay home, prepare. The telephone lines were overwhelmed. You couldn't reach anyone. My mother lived 40 miles away, and I couldn't get through to her for nearly 2 days. That was the hardest part. Not the snow itself, but the silence. No way to know if people you loved were safe. Children who were supposed to miss school for a day ended up missing 2 weeks. Parents, many of whom both worked, suddenly had no childcare. Factories closed not for a day but for the full week. Some people lost paychecks. Others found neighbors they'd never actually spoken to before because you had to help. It was instinct, not choice. You checked on the elderly couple at the corner. You made sure the new family 3 doors down had enough heat and food. The snow kept coming. The wind didn't ease. And somewhere in those first 48 hours, every person in that region understood that they were witnessing something genuinely historic. It wasn't just weather. It was the moment when everything modern, the schedules, the systems, the constant motion, came to a complete halt. Do you remember where you were when that storm hit? Or another storm that changed your week entirely? By Thursday morning, the snow had accumulated to heights that didn't seem real. In Boston, drifts reached the second-story windows of houses. In New York City, the mayor declared a snow emergency, and for the first time since the Depression, he told people not to come to work. Not to work. In the middle of a weekday, the news reported that 17 inches had fallen in some places, 27 inches in others. The drifts, those were a different measurement entirely. Wind gusts reached 65 miles an hour. Cold settled in at 12 below zero. The wind chill made it closer to 40 below. Your car door would freeze shut. Your breath would stick to your scarf. Federal offices closed. The post office, already stretched thin, fell further behind. Hospitals saw more cases of frostbite and hypothermia in those days than they'd seen in entire previous winters. The state of Pennsylvania alone eventually declared it the worst winter storm of the century. Not bad. The worst. What kept people going was routine, even broken routine. You still made breakfast. You still looked after the children. You heated coffee on the stove. The power went out in some neighborhoods for hours at a time, and families gathered in living rooms with blankets, listening to battery-powered radios for storm updates. A transistor radio became essential equipment. Many homes still had them from the 60s. Old technology suddenly vital again. The snow removal equipment couldn't keep pace. Salt and sand ran out. Plows would clear a road, and the wind would fill it in again within minutes. Truck drivers abandoned their rigs in the middle of highways. A drive that normally took 3 hours took 12, or became impossible. Countless people simply pulled over and slept in their vehicles until daylight, until the roads became passable again. Food became a conversation point. How much did you have? Could you get milk? Bread? A neighbor I knew had twins, and she'd only had half a loaf when the storm began. For 3 days she rationed carefully. Another neighbor across the street had overstocked. He'd always been a preparation type, and brought over a fresh loaf on Friday morning. The television, when the power held, showed nothing but storm coverage. Reporters in overcoats stood in intersections, pointing out the accumulation. They interviewed people waiting for rescue. They tracked the storm's movement. By Friday, the snow had pushed down into Kentucky. The storm was massive, slow-moving, and relentless. It wasn't passing. It was settling in. The newspapers, once the mail resumed, carried photographs that stayed in people's minds for decades. The sheer scale of it. Car completely buried. A child standing on the drifted snow at the height of a roof. The absolute stillness of a city street with no vehicles, no motion, no life. By Friday evening, most people had settled into an unexpected rhythm. The storm wasn't going anywhere, and neither were we. I spent that night playing cards with my children by lamplight because we'd switched off most of the electric lights to conserve power. My daughter, who was 8, asked if we were going to die. I told her no. I told her we had heat, we had food, and we were together. She seemed to accept that. Children understand security more simply than we do. It's about presence, not assurance. My husband still hadn't made it home. He'd stopped calling because the phone lines were too congested. I'd stopped worrying in the way you worry at the beginning. Instead, there was a kind of waiting, a patient, steady knowing that when the roads opened, he would come home. Until then, there wasn't much use in fear. The neighbor, the one with the bread, knocked on the door Saturday morning. He'd walked over, you couldn't drive, carrying instant coffee and powdered milk. Just checking, he said. We talked for 10 minutes in the entryway, both still in coats. He mentioned his car was probably going to need a new alternator when all this was done. I asked about his wife. They'd been fine. Just tired. Bored, actually. The television had gone to emergency broadcast mode, which was the same message repeating every few minutes. Saturday afternoon, my son built a fort in the backyard. The snow was stacked so high that you could tunnel into the drifts. He carved passages, built chambers, created entire structures just from the snow around us. It kept him occupied until 4 o'clock, when the light went. He came in numb-handed and happy, the happiest I'd seen him in days. That evening we made soup from canned vegetables and a ham bone I'd saved. Real soup, the kind that simmered for hours. The house smelled like something intentional. My mother-in-law, who'd managed to reach us by phone, said her neighborhood looked like they'd been transported to Russia. Everything was ice and white. No cars moved. No people walked. Just snow and wind and the occasional sound of a snowplow attempting the main road. The radio said the National Guard was delivering food to families who needed it. It said stranded drivers were being rescued. It said schools would remain closed indefinitely. It said the governor was urging patience. By Saturday night, patience was what we had in abundance. I remember lying in bed, listening to the wind. It had its own rhythm, a sound that somehow became almost soothing after 24 hours of hearing it. My daughter slept between us. The electricity was on. The furnace was running. We were safe. By the third night of it, we'd stopped measuring time in hours and started measuring it in tasks: breakfast, lunch, dinner, sleep. Simple and complete. By Sunday, the snow had finally stopped falling. The wind eased, and what emerged was a landscape that looked like it belonged to an entirely different season, or perhaps a different planet altogether. The roads began to clear slowly. Massive plows, sometimes 3 or 4 working in tandem, pushed through neighborhoods. The National Guard trucks appeared more frequently. By early Monday morning, a snowplow worked our street. It took 2 hours to clear a single block. The sheer weight of snow meant that clearing wasn't just moving it, it was breaking it into smaller pieces, pushing it, spreading it, making decisions about where all of it would go. My husband came home on Monday evening. He'd stayed at a motel near the highway with 40 other stranded drivers. They'd waited for the roads to open. He looked tired in the way that only waiting can make you tired. He sat down at the kitchen table and didn't move for 20 minutes. Then he asked if we had coffee. We did. Of course we did. The cost of the storm was starting to emerge. $17 billion in damage, a number so large it barely meant anything. But it meant something in individual ways. The heating bills, when they arrived in February, were devastating for families. People who'd relied on that paycheck from the week the factories closed struggled through the following month. Some small businesses didn't reopen. A few people died, those who were stranded on highways or who suffered heart attacks while shoveling. But something else emerged too. People talked about their neighbors differently. The woman who'd brought bread became a familiar friend. The man who'd shoveled our elderly neighbor's driveway without being asked did it again that week. And the next. Phone lines that had been dead with static suddenly felt precious. Conversations lingered. Schools reopened the following week. Children returned to normal schedules. The salt trucks came through again and again, destroying the edges of lawns but making roads safe. By the second week of February, it almost seemed unreal. Did that happen? Yes, the snow piles at the edge of parking lots insisted. Yes, the newspapers confirmed. Yes, the school superintendent announced that because of the extended closure, the school year would run into June. The storm became the reference point for everything. Before the blizzard, people said. After the blizzard, snow forecasts triggered a different kind of attention now. People stocked their pantries differently. Families kept more supplies on hand. Some bought generators. Others never entirely trusted winter forecasts the same way again. What had changed, finally, was the understanding that modern life, with all its systems, schedules, and certainties, could stop. Not might, could. And when it did, what mattered was simpler than we usually let it be. Nearly 50 years later, I still think about that storm when January comes. I'm not anxious. I'm just aware. There's a kind of respect that develops for weather, for systems beyond our control, for the way a single week can shift how you understand safety and community. The official records call it the blizzard of '78. Meteorologists still use it as a benchmark. But for those of us who lived through it, it was simply the time the world stopped. Not dramatically, quietly. All the noise of ordinary living just ceased. People kept diaries during those days. I found mine a few years ago. Entries for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday were almost identical. Still snowing. Children inside. Heat on. That's all I wrote. Not because nothing was happening, but because what was happening was so complete that there wasn't much else to say. The storm taught something that's harder to grasp now. It taught that you could be without moving, without working, without the constant forward motion. And that absence wasn't failure. It was life, just in a different shape. Children played. Families talked. Neighbors helped. These things happened not because we chose them in the moment, but because when everything else stopped, these were what remained. There was a loss too, quieter than the news acknowledged. The small inconveniences of ordinary winter. A slow drive home, a late delivery, an inconvenient closure. These became unthinkable after the blizzard. We learned to fear weather perhaps more than we needed to. We learned to prepare in ways that sometimes bordered on anxiety rather than readiness. But mostly what remained was a kind of witness. Those of us who were there carry something specific. We know what silence in a city sounds like. We know how quickly supply chains break. We know that the systems we trust are built on assumptions that can, in 1 week, prove inadequate. We also know what community looks like when it has no choice. When the power fails and you can't scroll or stream or work remotely. When you must actually see your neighbor, must actually ask if they need help, must actually find conversation without digital mediation. That was the gift embedded in the difficulty, the return, however temporary, to a way of being together that had almost disappeared. If you lived through a winter like that or remember someone who did, that memory is part of our shared history now. These storms, these interruptions, these moments when everything slows, they shape how we understand resilience, community, and what we truly need. Thank you for spending this time with me, remembering the winter when the East stood still.